Well, are the new tariffs liberating, or is this going to tank our economy and our personal finances? Again, if you flip on Fox News Channel, you're going to see that this is the greatest thing for America. If you flip on CNN or MSNBC, this is the worst thing that Trump has ever done for the history of the United States. So all kinds of yelling happening about online right now. So we wanted to ask Carol Roth, finance expert, author of the great book, You Will Own Nothing, to join us now to talk about all of this and more. Carol, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, nice to see you guys. It's been a little bit.
It has been. So help us sort through this, because, I mean, I think this deserves some nuance here. And I think most Americans watching right now are like, how is this going to affect my family? How is this going to affect my ability to send my kids to college, put food on the table? If you watch Fox News, this is the greatest thing for America. CNN says this is the worst thing for America. Where do you come down on this?
So I come down in where everybody's going to hate me, because I do live in a place of nuance. So I'll just start with that. I think it's important to talk about these tariffs in context. And the context was that coming out of the last administration, people had absolutely been decimated. Their personal balance sheets had been crushed by inflation. We know that they took on record debt. Their savings were down. And they voted overwhelmingly for President Trump because they wanted him to bring some stability and certainty to pricing and to the economy. They wanted things like deregulation and certainty in the tax code and incentives to put forth more growth in the economy and be able to have a clear path. And I think that part of the challenge is that the tariffs have now come out in front of many of these things in a very chaotic and, in my opinion, poorly communicated fashion. So that is setting people, kind of on a path of uncertainty and showing up in terms of pessimism instead of optimism, and lower consumer confidence and business confidence, which can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think the other thing about the tariffs, and there are places where, I can argue that tariffs make all of the sense in the world. Places like securing our national defense. We want to be able to produce ammunition here and ships and things that deal with maybe technology. There are places where it makes sense. And there are places where it's never going to make sense because of our regulatory environment, our cost structure, both in terms of labor and energy. There are certain things that we're just never going to manufacture here. So I think the expectation was that the tariffs were going to be more focused and surgical. And had they been, okay, we're going to really focus in on these key areas, I don't think you would be having these issues. But when it's poorly communicated, when it's broad across the board, and then yesterday, when you get this proclamation that they are reciprocal, yet the math is not based on any sort of reciprocity. It's not reciprocity based on a product category. Hey, you're charging us this much for rice. We're going to charge you this much for rice. It's not even based on reciprocity in terms of you're charging us this much as a country on average. We're going to do this. It's based on some sort of calculation that is the trade deficit divided by the imports of the country. And that is kind of numbers out of nowhere. And by the way, even if you're not charging us tariffs, there's a 10% across the board minimum. So it makes no sense in terms of this concept of reciprocity and how all of this was calculated. So I think that's part of the frustration. It's not that, a specific, tariffs are bad or tariffs aren't. It's the approach, it's the communication, and frankly, just a lot of the conflicting statements around tariffs that I think is causing a lot of the consternation. And unfortunately, it's become very politicized. Depending on which side of the aisle you're on, you're going to make an argument in many cases that you would never make if it was happening on the other side of the aisle.
Right. And as you point out, since it's not a one-to-one reciprocity, you charge us 10%, so we'll charge you that much. That opens the door for negotiation with dozens of countries. So now each one of us has to come back. And does the Trump administration, you think, even have the bandwidth for that? Is there any possibility that this is just an opening salvo?
I mean, I do think, and I certainly at this point hope that this is more art of the deal. And what happens is that there are probably, in my guess, a small concession made somewhere with a handful of key players, and then everything across the board kind of falls from there. Everybody declares massive victory, and all the people who've been making arguments that are now going to end up in conflict with that resolution, suddenly those arguments go out the window. So that is the hope. But the longer term concern, and I think you can see this in the markets, is how long does this last? Because the Trump team seems very committed to this. And then also just the general uncertainty. It's very difficult for businesses, big and small alike, to make decisions about investment, about hiring, about running their country when things change on a dime. It's just not a constructive environment. And this is something that impacts everybody. So if we're going to talk about making America great again, and we're going to talk about America first, that needs to be part of the equation. You cannot just look at one specific piece and not see how it, relates to every other aspect of the economy. And so, if you are a company that all of a sudden decoupled from China in the last couple of years because you thought you were doing the right thing, because we said that, China is not our friend, and you moved your manufacturing to Vietnam. Now you just found out that you're going to get hit with a 46% tariff. No good deed goes unpunished. It's very difficult to operate under those kinds of constraints.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the people who hate these tariffs are saying that this is going to collapse a number of countries' currencies, that there's going to be a high rate of panic. And when investors sense panic, they kind of run. They don't walk, they run. The U.S. dollar sank more than 2% against the euro, the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc, oil and gold both fell. But also we saw, gold prices surging. So I'm not exactly sure where some of this is shaking out. But it seems to be just a lot of uncertainty. And there seems to be, to your point about the communications piece, kind of haphazardness as it relates to some world leaders, like Trump cozying up to Mark Carney in Canada. And I don't understand that, where it's like, I know there's this weird sort of throw things at a wall appeal. It seems like right now, cozying up to Canada, cozying up to Mark Carney, liberal in Canada, and allowing them to kind of get off the hook and then kind of walking it back and then going back again. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now. I can speak to people who've had stuff stuck at the border, like the Canadian customs. Stuff is just shoved there, stuck there. They don't know what to do right now.
Well, I know small businesses who even before yesterday were getting absolutely crushed. We had a 20% tariff already on China. And normally it would take, to say, bring in like $500,000 worth of goods, it might cost you four figures to bring that container in. But when you now have a 20% tariff on top of those goods, it costs six figures to bring that container in. And no, China is not paying for that. That is the small business paying for it. So either they put that out to their customers, which ends up making it more expensive for individuals, or they try to eat that. And over time, it ends up putting that company out of business. And that is American jobs. It's also customers from overseas who are bringing their money into the United States to buy the company's products. So again, everything is interconnected, and there isn't enough thought given as how does this impact Main Street, even something like the stock market, because there are going to be a lot of people who don't care about Wall Street and say, well, these fat cats, they've been getting rich. But again, that comes back to Main Street, because when people's 401ks and pensions are going down, they feel less wealthy. They make fewer purchases. That impacts the ability, again, to hire and invest, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And again, in context, we are in a position, a very precarious financial position that the Biden administration left us in. So if we all of a sudden end up in a recession because we're not getting receipts from capital gains on the stock market, and we're not getting, the same kind of bump of growth of the economy, and we don't take in as much in revenue at the government level, that could actually explode the deficit to GDP and put us into a debt spiral. So all of these things, again, are interconnected. And Clayton, I want to point out one thing, because you said something in sort of a passing, and I don't even know if you realized how important it was, but the dollar is down. The 10-year yield is down. And these are actually objectives of the Trump administration. It's something that they have been trying to affect. So there's part of me that believes that that is part of the reason we're seeing this, heavy-handed approach is to get these down so that we can have some sort of grand Mar-a-Lago accord and reset the financial landscape. Because right now, we cannot go on paying more for interest than we can for our defense.
Hold on. So there's been a lot of speculation. You bring up a great point, but there's been a lot of speculation that this is an intentional move. We know the 10-year yield. Yes. We talked about that yesterday on the show. They're trying to get that number down, right? You're right about that. But there's been a lot of speculation. They're trying to, in many ways, torpedo the U.S. dollar.
Correct.
And maybe even push it back to a gold standard once again, using this as a way, sort of, like a Trojan horse plan here. Do you buy into that?
So if you go back and you listen to Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, and some of the things that he said before he was part of the Trump administration, there is a specific speech that he gave at the Manhattan Institute, I believe, last June. And he's talking about the fact that, we are at the precipice of this new global order, and he sees that there is going to be some sort of a reset needed, and that he would like to be a part of it. So he's already been sniffing around that. He's also, if you looked at comments that he made probably a month or a month and a half ago, he said he was going to, monetize our assets better, which led many of us to speculate that, he was talking about writing up gold and increasing it on our balance sheet to at least, current pricing, if not, having some sort of an accord that makes it higher. Now, he's since said, that's not what he meant. But just because a politician say that's not what they meant doesn't mean that that's not what they meant. Right. So there are deeper things for sure in play here. But my opinion is that from a choreography standpoint, I still think that not causing the chaos and panic, and you're doing the things that will unleash the growth side of the equation from the deregulation standpoint, the tax certainty standpoint and the like, is the right way to then also be able to have the latitude to do these other things. And that this order of operations may seem trivial, but based on the tight financial situation that we have, it's very, very critical.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, because if you follow Carol on X, she's a voice of reason. She doesn't panic, but she definitely gives you your opinion. And during the last, especially 5 years, following her analysis of what the Biden administration did to us during the pandemic, what the goal was of globalists through her books, You Will Own Nothing, The War on Small Business, really one of my favorite voices in finance. So thanks for coming back on Redacted. We've missed you.
Thanks, Carol.
No. Appreciate you guys. If I could just plug quickly, I also have a free economic newsletter at carolroth.com/news. So if you want to be educated, grab that there too.
Oh, there it is on the screen, carolroth.com/news. There you go. Carol, great to see you. Thank you so much.